When one of the most decorated drivers in racing history walked into the Ferrari garage in 2025, absolutely nobody expected what happened next. The seven-time world champion, a driver who had dominated Mercedes for over a decade, suddenly found himself in a position he hadn't experienced in years. And the worst part? His own team stopped believing in him. This is a story of how Lewis Hamilton earned back the trust he never knew he'd lost, and why this redemption arc might be the most important one of his entire career. Let's set the scene. Lewis Hamilton joined Ferrari with the kind of fanfare that comes with one of the biggest signings in motorsport history. Fans were excited. Analysts predicted a renaissance. Hamilton himself was optimistic. But the 2025 season? It became one of the most humbling years of his life. While his teammate Charles Leclerc accumulated 7 podium finishes, Hamilton couldn't grab a single one. Not one. 86 championship points separated them by season's end, a gap so massive it made headlines across every motorsport publication in the world. But here's what nobody was really talking about at the time: the psychological toll this was taking behind closed doors. Hamilton recently opened up to Auto, Motor, and Sport about something that had been eating at him all year. He revealed that the fundamental issue wasn't just the car, wasn't just the performance gap, and wasn't just the bad luck that seemed to follow him every single race weekend. The real problem was far more personal. The trust was gone. And when trust disappears in a team environment, especially in a sport as demanding as Formula One, everything else crumbles with it. Think about what that means for a moment. Ferrari brought in arguably the greatest driver of his generation, and instead of being heard, instead of being believed, Hamilton found himself questioning whether anyone around him actually thought he could still deliver at the highest level. The team was essentially sending a message with their inaction. Why should we listen to you when you're getting these results? That's the exact quote from Hamilton himself. Those words carry so much weight because they represent the moment when institutional doubt becomes personal rejection. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. Ferrari, as an organization, wasn't completely written off. The team knew they had performance issues with the car itself. Charles Leclerc, a driver universally respected and celebrated at the Scuderia, was also struggling in ways that didn't match his talent level. So instead of simply accepting mediocrity, something shifted internally. Hamilton and Leclerc started pushing harder for change. They demanded modifications. They advocated for a different approach to car development. They weren't just drivers anymore. They became agents of transformation within the team. And then 2026 arrived. It's only been a handful of races into this new season, but the difference is already staggering. Hamilton is now sitting third in the championship. He secured a Grand Prix victory. More importantly, he's starting to look like the championship contender we've watched dominate for the better part of 2 decades. But the most significant change, the trust has returned. Hamilton explicitly told media outlets that the cooperation is finally working. The things he asked for are now being implemented. The team is listening again. This transformation didn't happen because of one miraculous upgrade or a single genius engineering solution. It happened because Ferrari as an institution decided to change how they operate. They started treating their drivers' input not as complaints from underperforming pilots, but as valuable intelligence from world-class competitors who know what they need to perform at their absolute best. This is a management lesson that extends far beyond motorsport. When your top talent is struggling, the worst response is dismissal. The best response is listening. What's particularly remarkable is the timing of Ferrari's championship drought. Since 2008, the Italian team hasn't won a Constructors' Championship. That's nearly 2 decades of falling short of their primary objective. They've had multiple talented drivers, substantial budgets, and incredible facilities, but something was systematically broken in how the organization functioned. The Hamilton situation became a microcosm of this larger problem. Here's a legendary driver with an incredible track record, and instead of mining his experience for solutions, the team was essentially ignoring his input because his immediate results weren't delivering. Now, it's important to note that Hamilton isn't trying to paint himself as a victim here. His framing is collaborative, not confrontational. He acknowledges that the process is not a one-way street. He and Leclerc have been pushing the team forward, but the team has also been pushing back in productive ways, finding middle ground and working towards solutions together. This is the kind of mature, professional handling of adversity that actually works in complex organizations. He didn't demand changes, he proposed them. He didn't abandon ship, he invested more deeply in the relationship. The broader narrative here is about resilience and reputation. For most of his career, Hamilton has been the guy who had everything figured out. He was the prodigy who dominated from his first week in Formula One. He was the Mercedes maestro who turned a team into a competitive empire. But in 2025, he had to confront something harder than any on-track challenge: the question of whether his success was repeatable outside of an environment perfectly suited to him. Would he still be championship material with a different team? Could he elevate a struggling organization? Or was he just another driver who couldn't deliver when circumstances weren't ideal? The early indicators from 2026 suggest he's emphatically answering those questions. Not only is he proving he can still perform at the highest level, he's also demonstrating that he can be a catalyst for organizational change. Ferrari seems to be finally embracing the kind of collaborative approach that modern championship teams require. The upgrades are coming, the wins are accumulating, the momentum is building. What makes this story even more compelling is what it reveals about the nature of championship-level performance in Formula One. It's not just about the driver. It's not even just about the car. It's about the entire ecosystem. The trust between driver and team, the quality of technical communication, the willingness to iterate quickly, and the belief that even when things are going poorly, there's a path forward. Hamilton and Ferrari have found that path. The question now is whether they can stay on it long enough to end that 18-year championship drought. The concept of trust in professional sports is far more than just a feel-good narrative. It's foundational to performance. When a driver trusts that their team is listening, they can communicate more effectively about what they're experiencing in the car. When engineers trust that a driver's feedback is accurate and actionable, they can make better development decisions. When both parties trust that they're working toward the same objective, they move faster toward solutions. During Hamilton's difficult 2025 season, this trust structure completely broke down. And the breakdown happened in a very specific way. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a public conflict or a heated argument. It was subtler than that. A gradual erosion of confidence that manifested as reduced communication, fewer implemented suggestions, and a growing sense that Hamilton was being heard but not listened to. There's a crucial difference between those two things. Consider the position Hamilton found himself in. He's arriving at a new team with decades of championship-level experience. His instincts are telling him certain things about how the car behaves, what adjustments might help, and what the team's development priorities should be. But he's also delivering results that don't match his status or his expectations. In that situation, a driver has exactly two options: either accept that maybe their judgment is impaired by the poor results, or continue advocating for their perspective while the evidence seems to contradict them. It's psychologically brutal. What Ferrari's team was essentially doing, perhaps unintentionally, was placing the burden of proof entirely on Hamilton. They were saying, essentially, show us results first, then we'll take your suggestions seriously. But that creates an impossible catch-22. You can't deliver results without the car being competitive. You can't get the car competitive if your suggestions aren't being implemented. You're trapped in a feedback loop that only feeds your own doubt. Ferrari's approach in 2025 might have worked fine if Hamilton were just another driver, but he isn't. He's someone who has shaped teams around him for his entire career. He's someone whose inputs at Mercedes revolutionized how that organization approached development and driver management. He's someone who has the credibility to be trusted even when immediate results aren't there. By not giving him that trust, Ferrari was essentially refusing to leverage one of their biggest assets. The fascinating part is that Ferrari wasn't doing this out of malice or incompetence. The team was struggling with fundamental car performance issues that affected both drivers. Charles Leclerc, despite his 7 podiums, was also frustrated. Both drivers were pushing for the same kinds of changes, but because Hamilton's results were worse, his voice carried less weight. This is a human tendency we all understand. We're more likely to listen to someone when they're succeeding. But in elite sports, that tendency can be actively damaging. What seems to have happened between the end of 2025 and the start of 2026 is a philosophical shift within Ferrari's leadership. Someone, somewhere in that organization's hierarchy, decided that maybe they needed to approach this differently. Maybe the problem wasn't that Hamilton lost his abilities or his insight. Maybe the problem was that Ferrari wasn't creating an environment where those abilities and insights could flourish. That realization changed everything. This is important because it speaks to organizational culture. Ferrari has historically been a team with incredible resources and incredible ambition, but also a team that hasn't quite figured out how to convert that into consistent championship performance in the modern era. Part of that, arguably, is because the culture has traditionally been about hierarchy and status, rather than collaboration and trust. The team does what the team thinks is best, and drivers adapt. But modern Formula One requires something different. It requires driver and team working as a unified intelligence, sharing information freely and making decisions based on what actually works rather than who has the most authority. Hamilton and Leclerc seem to have catalyzed a change in this dynamic. By both pushing for different approaches, they forced Ferrari to reconsider, and the results have been immediate. Ferrari brought consecutive wins at 2 of the last 3 Grand Prix. They're planning new upgrades for the Belgian and Dutch races. They're competitive in a way they haven't been in years. It all traces back to the decision to actually listen to the drivers. The psychological component of this cannot be overstated. When Hamilton says, "the trust is there now," he's describing a fundamental shift in how he experiences being part of the team. He's probably experiencing less second-guessing of his own judgment. He's probably getting quicker feedback on whether his suggestions are working. He's probably able to sleep better at night knowing that when he offers input, people are taking it seriously. All of those things accumulate to improve performance. You can't separate the mental and emotional components from the competitive ones in sports at this level. Looking at how Leclerc has responded to Hamilton's arrival and now to this renewed culture of trust is also instructive. Charles is a generational talent who suffered through 2025 alongside Hamilton, but his numbers were better, so he didn't experience quite the same loss of confidence. Now, in 2026, both drivers are thriving in this new environment. Leclerc returned to form at the British Grand Prix, picking up a victory. Hamilton is consistently competitive, and instead of there being internal tension or one driver dominating the other, they're pushing each other and the team forward together. This is the ideal team dynamic, not the false unity where drivers pretend to be teammates while secretly competing hard, but genuine collaboration where 2 competitive drivers push each other and the team forward.
Team to be better every single day. That's what Ferrari seems to have achieved, and it's remarkably similar to what Hamilton had built over his years at Mercedes, just in a different context and with different personalities involved. To fully understand why the trust situation at Ferrari became so dire during 2025, we need to examine exactly how catastrophic Hamilton's season actually was, and why it had such profound psychological effects. The statistics are almost shocking when you line them up. 86 championship points behind his teammate, 0 podiums, in a car that despite its struggles was capable of podiums. His teammate managed 7. That's not a small gap. That's not a performance variance that can be easily explained by luck or circumstance. That's a chasm. For someone like Lewis Hamilton, and this is crucial to understanding his perspective, this kind of season is essentially unprecedented. He's won world championships, he's dominated grids, he's adapted to different cars, different teams, and different competitive landscapes. He's faced extraordinary pressure and delivered under it repeatedly. But a season where he couldn't even make a podium? That was new. That was frightening, probably, and that was the moment where faith in his abilities, both his own faith and the team's faith, started to waver. The car was genuinely difficult that year. Ferrari themselves acknowledged this. Charles Leclerc, a brilliant driver in his own right, was also struggling more than he typically does, so this wasn't purely about Hamilton's capability declining. The machine itself was part of the problem. But, and this is the critical point, once results start going badly, everything gets interpreted through that lens. Hamilton offers a suggestion. Well, his results are bad, so maybe he doesn't understand what he's talking about. Hamilton identifies a problem with the car. Maybe he's just making excuses. Hamilton suggests a different development direction. If he was performing better, we take this more seriously. This is where team culture becomes absolutely critical. A team with strong trust mechanisms in place would have said, "We trust this driver and his judgment. His results are suffering, but that doesn't invalidate his insights. Let's listen extra carefully to what he's telling us." Ferrari didn't do that, and that decision had consequences that rippled through the entire 2025 season. One of the most telling aspects of the situation is how Hamilton described it himself. He said that naturally, people tend to listen to you less than. That acknowledgement shows remarkable self-awareness. He's not claiming that Ferrari treated him unfairly without cause. He's recognizing a natural human tendency to doubt someone who's delivering poor results. But then he adds the crucial part. They said, "Why should we listen to you when you're getting these results?" That quote encapsulates the exact dynamic that was toxic about the situation, because it creates a circular logic that's almost impossible to escape. We have to consider what this does to a driver psychologically. You're operating at the highest level of motorsport. You're in a car that has genuine performance issues. You're trying to solve those issues by identifying them and communicating about them. But your communication isn't being acted upon because your immediate results aren't good. So the car never improves. Your results never improve. And the team's reasons for not listening seem to be validated by your continued poor results. It's a psychological trap that would break most people. The fact that Hamilton didn't break, that he didn't demand a transfer or give up on the project, says something important about his character and his commitment to the challenge. He stayed, he kept pushing, he kept advocating for change even when nobody was listening. That's a choice that's easier to make when you're at the beginning of a multi-year contract and you're young enough to believe the future is full of possibility. Hamilton is older now. He's had success. By all logic, he could have decided 2025 was just a bad year and written it off. Instead, he made the choice to dig in and fight. The competition within the team played a role as well. Having Charles Leclerc in the other car, performing better, would have been a source of additional pressure. Not in a toxic way, both drivers respect each other, but simply the reality that your teammate is outperforming you is psychologically challenging. And when the team is using your teammate's superior results as evidence that you're the problem rather than the car being the problem, it compounds the difficulty. What's particularly insightful is that both Hamilton and Leclerc responded to the situation by doing the same thing. They both pushed for change. They both advocated for the team to do better. They both identified the car's limitations and pushed for a different development philosophy. In other words, they were sending the same message. The current trajectory isn't working, and we need to change course. That unified message from both drivers seems to have been what finally broke through to Ferrari's leadership. This points to an important organizational dynamic. It's easier for a team to dismiss one driver's complaints as making excuses. It's much harder to dismiss the same complaints coming from two drivers who are otherwise competing hard against each other. When Charles Leclerc, a driver Ferrari had invested heavily in and was clearly prioritizing, started saying the same things as Hamilton, suddenly those complaints had to be taken seriously, and suddenly things started to change. The 2026 season began, and almost immediately the difference was apparent. Hamilton's performance trajectory completely shifted. He went from a driver who couldn't secure a single podium in an entire year to a driver who was competitive for victories within weeks of the new season starting. That's not a gradual improvement. That's a fundamental change in circumstances and psychology. And while some of it is surely due to improved car performance, much of it is also about the shift in how Hamilton is being treated within the team and how he's experiencing his role there. When Hamilton says the trust is there now, he's describing something that's both intangible and absolutely critical. It means that when he tells his engineers something, they listen with the assumption that he's providing valuable information rather than making excuses. It means that suggestions he makes are considered seriously and implemented if they make technical sense. It means that he's not constantly questioning whether people believe in him. And all of those psychological shifts combine to create an environment where peak performance is actually possible. The mechanics of how Ferrari improved are interesting too.
The team didn't completely reinvent their car or their approach between seasons. What they did was they started implementing the kinds of changes that Hamilton and Leclerc had been suggesting. They brought upgrades, they adjusted their development philosophy, they made iterative improvements that, while they might not seem revolutionary individually, combined to make a significant difference collectively. And importantly, they communicated these changes to the drivers, bringing them into the solution rather than making them guess what's happening. This is crucial because driver feedback in Formula One is incredibly valuable. Drivers experience the car in ways that telemetry alone can't capture. They can feel things, sense things, understand things about how the car behaves that data streams might miss. So when a team stops listening to that feedback, they're not just hurting the driver psychologically, they're actually making worse technical decisions. By listening to Hamilton and Leclerc, Ferrari gained access to intelligence they were previously ignoring. The improvement in results has been dramatic. Ferrari won races in this early part of the 2026 season. They're constantly bringing new upgrades. Hamilton is now third in the championship, just 32 points behind the current leader. That's a realistic championship fight. That's a kind of position where you believe you can still win it. For Hamilton personally, this is his opportunity to prove that his championship-winning abilities weren't diminished by his struggles in 2025. They were just suppressed by circumstance. The interesting thing about this situation is that it vindicates a particular approach to team management. By listening to their drivers and implementing their suggestions, Ferrari has actually positioned themselves better competitively. This isn't just about keeping the drivers happy, though that's part of it. It's about accessing better information, making better decisions, and ultimately building a more competitive package. The drivers wanted the same thing the team wanted, to be competitive and to win championships. By trusting each other and working collaboratively, they're actually achieving that objective more effectively. It also speaks to something about Hamilton specifically. Despite the difficulty of 2025, he maintains his professional standards. He didn't publicly complain excessively. He didn't create drama. He didn't sulk or give up. He did what professional athletes do. He kept working, kept pushing, kept trying to improve things from within. And when circumstances changed and the team started listening, he was ready to deliver. That's the kind of player that elite organizations want around. That's someone who can be trusted to handle adversity and continue performing even in difficult circumstances. Looking ahead, there's still work to be done. Hamilton is competing against Mercedes drivers who have had more consistent performance throughout this season and the previous one. Leclerc is also competitive and improving. Red Bull still has to be considered a threat depending on their current form. But the important thing is that Hamilton is back in championship contention, and he's doing it within Ferrari, which validates the entire project. He joined Ferrari to win championships with the Italian team. The 2025 season looked like it might be a disaster that invalidated that goal. But 2026 is proving that all along, it was just a difficult chapter in a longer story. The emotional component of this situation shouldn't be underestimated either. For Hamilton, proving that he can overcome a season like 2025 and come back stronger is probably deeply satisfying. For Ferrari, proving that they can create an environment where one of the greatest drivers of all time can flourish is significant for their identity as a team. And for motorsport fans, watching this redemption arc play out has been genuinely compelling. Everyone loves a comeback story, and this is a legitimate one happening in real time at the highest level of motorsport. As we look ahead at the remainder of the 2026 season, several interesting questions emerge. Can Hamilton and Ferrari sustain this trajectory? Can they actually challenge for the championship? Will Leclerc's return to form at recent races elevate the team even further, or will it create the internal conflict that sometimes emerges when two competitive drivers in the same team are both performing well? The answer to that last question might actually be found in how well the lessons of this entire experience have been learned. If Ferrari has genuinely transformed their culture to be more collaborative and trusting, then two competitive drivers performing well shouldn't create the toxic dynamic that has sometimes emerged in their past. Instead, it should drive the team forward even more aggressively,
both drivers pushing hard, both drivers being listened to, both drivers contributing to solutions. That's the formula for sustained championship contention. There's also the question of what this means for Ferrari's future in terms of driver market. The fact that they can attract and successfully integrate a driver like Hamilton is significant. The fact that they're now using him effectively is even more significant. As word gets out in the paddock about how Hamilton is being treated, how his input is valued, and how the team is listening to drivers, Ferrari becomes an increasingly attractive destination for top talent. They're not just a team with money and history anymore, they're a team that understands how to integrate world-class drivers and make them better. The upgrades that Ferrari is bringing for the Belgian and Dutch Grand Prix will be crucial tests. If the team can continue to show improvement and bring competitive hardware to the track, Hamilton could have multiple victories within reach. And victories are what matter most in a championship fight. Right now, both Hamilton and Leclerc have one victory each this season. Mercedes drivers have accumulated more. If Ferrari can close that gap, they're back in genuine contention. And if they can close it while maintaining the trust and collaborative environment they've built, then they've discovered something more valuable than any individual upgrade: a culture of winning. For Hamilton personally, this season represents something profound. It's about legacy and proof of concept. He's proving that he can win championships in different environments, with different teams, and in different eras of the sport. He's proving that the difficulties of 2025 didn't diminish his abilities. And perhaps most importantly, he's proving that he can be a factor in organizational change. He didn't just join Ferrari to extract performance, he's actually helping to transform how they operate as a team. This has implications beyond just Formula One, too. In any high-performance environment, the dynamics that Hamilton and Ferrari are navigating are relevant. When a new person joins a team, they bring fresh perspectives and different ways of doing things. If that person has a track record of success, their input might be particularly valuable. But if they're not immediately delivering results, the temptation is to dismiss their perspective and stick with existing approaches. Ferrari's lesson is that sometimes you have to trust the person even when the immediate results aren't there. Sometimes transformation takes time. The statement that things I ask for are implemented might seem like a simple thing, but it's actually profound. For Hamilton, it represents a return to the kind of influence and respect he had built at Mercedes. For Ferrari, it represents the willingness to genuinely partner with their drivers, rather than just employing them. That partnership mentality is what separates teams that win championships from teams that occasionally get lucky with one good season. As the season progresses, Hamilton will have multiple opportunities to prove that the early improvements aren't just a blip. If he can string together consistent performances, if he can add victories to his column, if he can show that he's genuinely competitive in this Ferrari car, then the 2025 season becomes what it always had the potential to become. Not a disaster, but a learning experience that made him and the team better. The bigger picture narrative is about resilience, adaptation, and the power of trust in organizational settings. It's a story about a legendary driver and a legendary team finding their way through difficulty to something better. And it's a story that's still being written, with multiple chapters potentially remaining. The most compelling part? We don't know how it ends. That's what makes this story genuinely compelling. That's what keeps us watching and waiting to see what happens next.